And of course, it's wonderful to be here with Gretchen, but really a round of applause
gold
to you.
Stars.
Gold stars
For
everyone.
making the trek.
This is amazing. On my way here, I thought, well, if there are 5 or 10 here, it'll be a nice intimate discussion.
You and I have a nice conversation.
Great conversation.
Too.
So, the Happiness Project, New York Times bestseller. It did so very well and looked at something so simple. Just how to be happy and whether or not you were happy in your own life. And now you go one step further with Happier at Home. Why go there, Gretchen?
Well, you know, I had the idea to do it in this very weird experience where I was standing in my own kitchen, unloading the dishwasher, and my husband was watching golf and my children were playing, and I was hit by this wave of homesickness. And it was such a weird feeling to be feeling homesick when I was standing right in the middle of my own home. And I realized I was really feeling this kind of homesickness for what I have right now and right here, as if I had like suddenly leaped 20 or 30 years into the future and was looking back. And I had done all this thinking and writing about happiness, but I had never thought about this idea of home. And just the strange feeling of homesickness that I had got me to focus on this idea of home for the first time. And I began to realize that really home is is the foundation. And there's this wonderful line from Laura Ingalls Wilder, because I'm a fanatic for children's literature, where she writes, "There is no comfort anywhere for someone who dreads to go home." And I thought, you know, and at the time I didn't even come across that quotation, but I think, you know, your experience of your home is so important to your happiness. And I just realized there was a lot that I could do just with my experience of home. Very low-hanging fruit, things that I could do without a lot of time, energy, or money to change my experience of home.
And one of those things you did was that you created shrines, as you called them. You mentioned your love for children's literature, so there was a shrine to that, and then your kids. Tell me about those projects. And I laughed out loud when your sister said, "Really? You're doing this? This is so not you." You were so outside of your comfort zone on a lot of these projects.
Well, I'm not one of these. I don't have any collections really. I'm not a person who's very. Like my mother loves beautiful things and is always creating sort of beautiful spaces, and that is not me. I need a lot of coaching from her and from others to do it. But I realized that they're really, with possessions, if we get rid of the stuff that we don't need, don't use, and don't love, and then really shine a spotlight on the things that are really important to us, you can get a lot more happiness out of your things. And people create these shrines without realizing it. Like, I have a friend who has a shrine to wine, a friend who has a shrine to France, a friend who has this amazing shrine, what I would call a shrine, to arts and crafts, where she has this little closet that she has put in all these hooks and, you know, holders, and everything is so cunningly organized. You just want to go in there and just start scrapbooking because everything is so cunningly arranged. And I realized that if I took the time and really made the effort and pushed myself to organize my possessions in a way that would spotlight the things that were really important to me, make me more aware of them, that would increase my happiness in them. But of course, to do that, I had to get rid of the stuff that wasn't important to me. So it's sort of like, it's getting rid of the things so that you have more room for the things that really do matter.
And that's the thing. It wasn't so easy to do that.
No. Like,
it wasn't so easy to say, this is going to go and this is going to stay, especially when it came to your girls.
Well, I think a lot of people have this experience that sort of anything associated with your children becomes precious. But yet you cannot keep every, you know, Lego that they ever touched in their lives, or every finger paint that they ever made. And so I did have to really, and I still do, it's this ongoing process. Why is it so hard to stay on top of our stuff? It's just you have to really be disciplined about it. And so many of my resolutions are aimed at staying on top of clutter and keeping order on an ongoing basis, because I think it's surprising to me how much outer order contributes to inner calm more than it should, and yet everything is kind of constantly falling into disorder. So there's a lot of things that you need to do that are very helpful to do every day. And so now one of my resolutions is to go shelf by shelf. And now anytime I'm like you know when you have like 10 minutes before you need to leave the house, and it's not really long enough to do anything, and yet it's sometime. Now I just try to look wherever I am, just look and see this shelf, this closet, this drawer. and just quickly say, is everything in the right place? Do I want all this stuff? Do we use this stuff? Does something need to be thrown away or given away or recycled? And just attack it little by little to stay on top of all these things that are just constantly, you know, I went into my daughter's medicine cabinet and there was the Oragel, you know, the teething medicine. I mean, my daughters are 7 and 13. I mean, I don't need Oragel anymore, but I was like, oh, but it reminds me, you know, precious. I'm like, no, throw away the Oragel. You know, it's not, if I really love it, I can take a picture of it. I do not need to keep an old crusty bottle of Oragel in my medicine cabinet for the next 40 years, as tempting as it was. So yeah, it takes a lot of just being on top of these things.
And that's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
You mentioned your daughters, Eleanor and Eliza,
yeah.
And your husband, Jamie.
Yeah.
And they go through this whole journey with you. Tell me about their side of things and their feedback and what they thought of you delving into this second book.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I think I'm very typical for people doing kind of a happiness project because they're not really doing it, you know, and a lot of people will say to me like, oh, I want to do it, but my spouse doesn't want to. And my spouse doesn't want to. If anything, my spouse feels like a martyr to happiness. And so they don't really do it with me, but what I found is that even though almost everything that I do is just directed at me and changing my actions, when I change, they also change. So when I become more lighthearted and more fun-loving and better rested, then my family, I'm easier to deal with, and then they become easier to deal with. So even though I can't assign my husband resolutions as much as I would like to, you know, because there's always this temptation to think, you know, I would be happier if other people would behave properly. You know, you can't do that. You can't hand out these resolutions. And so they didn't really go through it with me, except for the way that like one of my resolutions is to underreact to a problem. So instead of, you know, I tend to take it to 11 and really fly off the handle and have a big reaction. And I work very hard at keeping it low and underreacting. And I realized that when I underreacted, then my family also stayed calmer, and everybody just, you know, and that just makes it easier. Having that big reaction made things harder, not easier. And so when something goes wrong, or, you know, my daughter tries to switch her, you know, sleepover arrangements at the last minute, and I want to just like yell at her, and I just keep it calm, everybody stays calmer. So they're unwitting accessories to the happiness project. They're not actually doing it with me very much.
Has Jamie read this?
Yeah, you know, though, it's funny, it kind of gives them the heebie-jeebies, which I totally understand. Like, it's like, you really have to read it and make sure that you're cool with everything. Because
he's got a starring role in
a person writing about happiness, I'm like, I don't want anybody, like, upset with me, you know, and I'm not writing the kind of book where it's important to tell, like, searing truths. And so I didn't think anything and it would upset him, but I wanted him to read it and just make sure. And he did read it, but it makes him feel funny. And it makes him feel funny. So, and I understand why that is. And here's a weird thing. I never mention any friends by name in the book, but the thing is, they know who they are. Like my friend that I go on the trip to Brooklyn to go to the perfume shop, she knows that was her, you know? And they never mention it to me. It's funny. I think it's like this sense of privacy. Like, it's kind of like being inside my head in a way that you wouldn't be. And so it's like there's a line that people don't cross in real life. They let the book be the book, and I know they've read it, but they don't say like, hey, I read your account of that time that, you know, that I gave you folding lessons in the restaurant or whatever. Even though it's clearly they know who they were. So it is a funny thing to be in another person's book.
Absolutely. There are a lot of lessons, Gretchen, to be learned in this book, life lessons. And one particular thing that you wrote, it was what Bob Dylan wrote about his wife. And I want to read this.
Oh yeah, get it exactly right.
Get it exactly right, because this really spoke to me. And
I'm
Bob,
so glad to hear that, because
I loved it.
Clearly
I loved it. And Bob Dylan wrote about his wife, and this is a quote: "The one thing about her that I always loved was that she was never one of those people who thinks that someone else is the answer to their happiness, me or anybody else. She's always had her own built-in happiness. And this is in the chapter called Interior Design. So you're working on you. It's inner work. What did you take that to mean, built-in happiness? Because you say, that's what I want.
Exactly. And because I thought, you know, wow, what would it be like to be married to Bob Dylan? I mean, that's got to be weird. And this idea that, you know, and there are people who have their own built-in happiness. And I think that's kind of what I felt like I needed to strive for, and really what I think we all need to strive for, because when someone else is the answer to our happiness, then we're very needy. You know, we need them to react a certain way. We need them to tell us a certain thing. We need them to be a certain way or be there for us. And clearly that's part of what we always need. To some degree, we are dependent on other people, and we need them for our happiness. That's clearly, like, ancient philosophers and contemporary scientists agree that close relationships with other people is a huge source of happiness. But I think you also need to strive for your own built-in happiness and to really feel like it's something that you are generating in yourself. And I just thought this idea that she had her own built-in happiness, it's a very powerful idea. And also, you know, and those are the people that I think help other people become happy. And that's one of the things that really became clear to me, was that one of the best ways to make other people happy is to be happy yourself. And so sometimes people, I think, worry that it's selfish to want to be happier, but actually the people that have their built-in happiness, I think, are the ones that help other people feel happier too, because there's something about it, you know, we're all drawn to that, and we get energy from that when they have their built-in happiness.
Yeah, we get what we give.
And in a family also, there's so much interconnection that one person's can help others also.
I always hated that line in Jerry Maguire where Renee Zellweger's character says, "You complete me."
I so agree. I'm so glad to hear you say that.
They needed to know this built-in happiness.
On so many levels. That's annoying.
It's wrong on so many levels.
And then it's quoted endlessly. Yes, okay.
It drove me nuts.
Clearly you and I like the same quotations.
We're on the same wavelength. We like the same quotations. Another one that I really liked, and I took this to heart, Gretchen and I were talking a little bit earlier, and I have an 8-year-old and a 1-year-old, and waking up at 3:30 in the morning.
Can you imagine?
You know what?
That's so...
the whole balancing thing, and that elusive balance, and are you doing it right? And the guilt associated with, you know, all these balls, juggling them all, and are you doing it right? And are you seeing your kids enough, and everything else? And then you said the days are long, and years are short, and aren't they? And are we spending them the right way? Are we spending those days and years the right way? Are we seeing our kids enough? Spending enough time with our family? You know, may love work, but are we focusing on that too much? I just thought it was particularly poignant.
I think of everything that I have written, that line is the thing that has resonated most with people. And I did this little 1-minute video where I told the story of being on a bus with my daughter, and when I had this wreck. And that, I think, is the thing that most people seem to identify with most. And it's something that, even though I wrote it, like, I have to remind myself of it every day, because it is so easy in ordinary life to just be looking forward and to thinking about, how do I get through my to-do list? How do I get through this morning? How do I get up out of bed? You know, am I going to get to sleep on time? All this stuff. And you forget, like, this is it, you know, and how do I appreciate this season of life and not take it for granted?
I would imagine that you heard from so many people, and maybe women in particular, who could identify with what you were trying to do here, and identify with that whole balancing act and marriage and everything else. The chapter on marriage is amazing as well, because you're just honest. And it's not hard to do that. It's not hard to say, well, you know what, yeah, he wanted to go to work, and I didn't really want him to go to work, but I told him it was okay because, you know, I'm trying to make this thing work. It really is a partnership, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's funny, I mean, one of the studies that I thought was hilarious was that it turns out that married couples treat friends and even strangers with more consideration than they treat each other. And I thought, that's true. And they said, well, you know, here's the love of my life. I want to be at least as nice to him as I would be to somebody who's behind me in the drugstore line. And it's fun. So I think part of it is again, just realizing, like, this is life. This is, you know, if I want to have like a tender, lighthearted, you know, relationship with my husband, I better act in a tender, lighthearted way and make the effort every day. You know, with my husband, the way I would with any relationship.
And you did, and that's where the more kisses came in.
Yes. Yes, I'm one of these people where if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't happen. So I like literally have a kissing schedule. It's, you know, kiss in the morning, kiss at night. And my husband sleeps, like, he sleeps later than I do, so usually he's still asleep when he gets his kiss. But, and he's a very, like, he's a softie, so he really wants his kisses. But yeah, I mean, it's just part of what I realize is if something's important to me, you have to make time for it, especially because there's so many competing priorities. But this is one thing that I've really found to be true, is that when you actually figure out a way to make time for something, a consequence of that is that there is less time for other things in a good way, because there isn't time for everything. And it's a mistake to feel like you should just make time for everything, because then sometimes things that are more important give way to things that are less important. And the more I realized that I took the time to figure out, like, what do I really want my day to include, well, then that means that other things aren't going to happen. So for instance, a friend of mine was deeply shocked when I confided to her that I did not make my children write thank you notes. And she's from the South, and so very, you know, politeness-minded, and she just felt like this was a major lapse. And I thought, well, you know, for you, this would be really important. And I just feel like I don't have time for that. Ideally, would I do it? Yes. Are other things more important? Yes. That's one of the things that has to fall away. That's how my life reflects my values. She would have had a life that reflected her values in a different way. And then I did rethink it because she was so deeply shocked. But I was like, yeah, life's too short. You know, days are long, you know, years are short, not doing the thank you notes. And so again, it's like you want to get everything in there, and sometimes that means like figuring out, well, for you, what's really important, not necessarily what's important to, you know, what other people think is important.
How did you come up with your 12 commandments?
That took months.
I bet.
Yeah. It's really...
To pare it down.
Yeah,
right?
to pare it down, exactly. Yeah. And this is a really thought-provoking, fun exercise. A lot of people have sent me their personal commandment lists, and so I encourage somebody to do it if you're interested in this kind of thing. And these are like the overarching principles of how you think and act, not like resolutions like go to bed on time. It's things like, you know, be Gretchen, which is the first one. And so these are really like, if I wanted to come up with the principles that would really sum up just about anything that I was trying to do, the most important ideas, and then to get them into very short, snappy sentences so that they would stick in my mind. And it was really valuable, and really, it's really interesting to figure out what those would be. Like one of them is this one called There Is Only Love, which comes from a friend of mine who had a really horrible boss. And she decided if she was going to work for this boss, she was like, there is only love. And she wasn't going to spend any time complaining or whining or gossiping or like being unhappy, because she really wanted this job, she really wanted to work. And she said, once I decided there is only love, it totally changed my attitude towards my job. And I was like, that's a great, like just that phrase for some reason just stuck in my mind. There is only love. And it's a really helpful thing to have running through your mind. But if I'd had some like long anecdote in my mind, I would never have remembered it. But just getting in those few words made it snappy enough that I could keep it in the forefront of my thoughts.
And then there was the 13th, choose a bigger life.
Choose a bigger life.
Choose a bigger life. Yes. that you didn't include.
Yeah,
but that's a great one.
Yeah, well, because I already had the 12 set, and then I heard about that later. But this is a great also, it's a very helpful thing if you're trying to make a decision, because you know how sometimes you're like, well, this is an apple and this is an orange and I can't decide, and these people say this and these people say that, and should I go back to medical school and all this kind of thing. And then but I realize whenever I'm tortured like that, if I say choose the bigger life, it's always clear to me which is the bigger life. And the thing is, your idea of the bigger life could be totally different from someone else's idea of the bigger life, but that doesn't matter because you're making a decision for yourself. So it gives you a lot of clarity in terms of like what motivates you. So for instance, the example that I had heard was a woman was, she was working full-time as a doctor, had a very big job, and she was thinking about having a baby, and it was sort of like now or never type of thing. And I thought, choose the bigger life. And what is the bigger life? To have the baby or not have the baby? Either one could be the right answer, depending on what you want. There is no right answer, only the right answer for you. And yet that question is a helpful way to think about it. And I'm very a fearful driver.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm a very fearful driver. And when I thought about, like, do I want to deal with this or do I want to just accept it as part of my nature, be Gretchen? And I thought, what is the bigger life? And I was like, the bigger life is a life when I'm not afraid to drive. I live in New York City, I don't have to drive that often, but it makes me uncomfortable that I'm afraid to drive. And the bigger life meant dealing with it. And I think for other people, they might have been like, choose the bigger life, let it go, do other things. I live in New York City, I don't need to drive, like, I don't care. That was a helpful question for me, because then I was like, that made it totally obvious what I should do.
Tell us, I want to delve a little bit more into that. Tell us the story about your fear of driving, but how you thought it would be better for your marriage, because it would be more equitable, right?
No, a lot of people don't see the connection.
They don't see the, but I see the connection. I get it, because her husband was doing all the driving everywhere, whether he was tired, whatever, because Gretchen didn't want to drive. And then your friend sent you a book.
Yes.
And she also said that there's a certain driving instructor that doesn't live so far from you. And you just let it slide for a while because you were a little fearful about what this might lead to. Tell us more. Pick up the story from there, because it's a good one.
Yeah. Well, this is one of these weird, there's this Zen saying, which I love, which is so uncannily true, that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And in this case, the teacher was like a year and a half too early. And my friend sent me this book, The God of Driving. And she was basically like, I was scared of driving, and now I'm over it, and here's the book, and here's what I did. And I was so, speaking of thank you notes, I was so unnerved by this challenge to me that I did not even acknowledge the fact that she had sent me this book. It wasn't somebody, it was like the sister of a friend. Like, so it was like, she really went out of her way to do a nice thing to send it to me, and I was just like so freaked out that I couldn't even respond. Like, so, you know, there was a lot going on there. And then finally I had this realization that my husband, who never complained about it, and with the very few times that I did drive, he was always like, you're a fine driver. He's like, he was very encouraging. And he didn't push me to drive when I didn't want to, but it was clearly something where if he was tired, if he needed to be on a conference call, like, we don't drive that much being in New York City, so when we do drive, it's usually a longer drive, like we're driving to get our daughter at summer camp or something. So I felt like I really needed to deal with this. And my sister is also afraid to drive. My sister lived in Los Angeles for 3 years without driving. That's hard. So she's driving now. But so I was like, here's this book, here's this driving instructor, everything, the way is clear for me. What am I waiting for? What do I think is going to be different? How am I going to feel in 2 years? Well, I wish I had done it. You know, I went through all these things, and everything was like, drive. Go learn to, drive again. And I didn't even need to learn to drive, because I already knew how to drive. I was a fine driver, but I also am one of these people that always wants to make sure I'm doing everything correctly. And I thought, maybe if I go to have a driving instructor, it will reassure me that I'm driving properly. And now I do it, and I try to drive once a week to make sure that I stay in the car and like remember what side the gas tank is on, right? I hadn't driven very much. I didn't even feel comfortable in my own car. And it's funny because one of my secrets of adulthood is that happiness doesn't always make you feel happy, which is one of these things that a scientist could not say because it's obviously paradoxical, but I can say. And so does driving make me happy? No. When I was never driving, I never thought about it, whatever. Now I think about driving all the time, and I dread it, and I don't like to drive. But I'm happier that I'm driving, because it is the bigger life, and I do feel like it's fair. And my husband now, like, we'll get in, and he's like, can you drive there, and I'll drive back, or can you take over halfway, or I need to, I'm really tired, can we switch off? And I feel like, good, I can do my part, I can drive.
Yeah. What is the biggest lesson, Gretchen, that you've learned about yourself through this experience thus far?
That is such an interesting question. What is the biggest thing I've learned about myself? Wow. I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is that is this paradox again, that I need to accept myself and also expect more from myself. And the tension is, when do I need to accept myself and my nature and my true limitations, and also my eccentricities and the things that I love? And then when do I need to expect more from myself, like with the driving, like with losing my temper, and say, I really can expect more from myself, and how to, and where that line is. Where is it being Gretchen in the way that I want to be, and where do I really have to think that I can push myself further? And I think what I've learned about myself is that there's never an answer to that. It's something that I have to think about every day, and many times every day. It's like, what's being asked of me, and what do I want to do?
Because you've really broken down happiness and what it means to be happy, or maybe, you know, and what it doesn't mean to be happy, has this allowed you to see people in another light?
Well, I am kind of a happiness bully, I have to say. And so, you know, especially those very close to me are used to me like trying to come over and clean their closets for them. But no, it really does. I mean, and in a way it's almost painful sometimes, because I'll see somebody doing something which I feel like is so clearly not helpful to their happiness that it's hard for me to be polite sometimes and not just be like, no, I'm going to tell you. But I think it's constructive in that I've also learned how to understand like being judgmental or being, I mean, obviously there is a sense of judgment there, but I also am trying to work on unsuspending judgment and just remembering to cut people slack and I don't know, and to try to be helpful when you can be helpful. Because every once in a while there is like, you can say, sometimes you just say one thing or make one suggestion and it's really super helpful to somebody, and it's so exciting when that happens. We've all had that situation where like you give the person the name of your dentist and it's like the greatest thing in the world, you know, and it's so exciting when that happens and you're able to like put the pieces together. So sometimes I'm able to do that and that's really exciting, yeah.
How much would those that are closest to you, your family, your friends that have known you a really long time, how much would they say that you've changed?
You know, that's interesting, because I think they've, you know, it's, my fundamental nature is the same, so I think in that way it's very consistent, but my experience of my life is much happier, and so I think that's what they would say is changing. Like, I just am more, like my life is just, I have more fun, you know, because I let go of a lot of things that I didn't enjoy, and now I'm doing a lot more, you know, my life is better reflects my values, and so I think that's what they would say. And definitely I think my children would say, I mean, what do they even remember, but I feel like I've done so many things that I did were aimed at like just being calmer and nicer and more fun, and, you know, and I think that's changed.
The special dates you did with your daughter. The Wednesday dates. Fantastic idea.
Yeah. No, this is a great thing. Like, because one of the things I thought is, you know, I don't have enough time with my older daughter. I have every morning with my younger daughter because she goes to school later and I walk her to school, but I was realizing I didn't have this time with my older daughter. So one of my personal commandments is identify the problem. And which sounds so obvious, but it's actually super helpful. And I thought, well, the problem is I don't have enough time alone with my daughter. Just fun time when we're not nagging and there's no homework, there's no errands, there's nobody else talking, there's no interference. This is calm, happy time, like when I walk with my younger daughter to school. And so I said, okay, well, I can solve that problem. So every Wednesday, I pick her up from school and we go do something for a couple of hours. Like we go to a museum or we go to a department store. She sometimes picks that. We take turns picking, and you get to pick what you want. So, you know, if she picks Bloomingdale's, then there I go. I'm like, I'm not going to buy you anything, but we can go if you want to go. But usually she'll pick someplace slightly more elevated. And then we just hang out. And I realize it doesn't even really matter what we do. It's just what's important is we're just walking around and talking, and there's no pressure, there's no interruptions. It's just, we're just hanging out together, the two of us, doing some little adventure. And it sounds like such a small amount of time. And at first I was like, what? One afternoon, one special afternoon a month, that's a week, that's nothing. But it was actually more than we were doing before. And there is something about just setting aside that time and making it a priority, not letting anything interfere with it. It really, I felt like I captured a value that was really important to me. And I was able to get it into my calendar. Again, like if something's important, get it on your calendar. Because if you just wait for free time, you know, you might not have free time for 10 years. You have to make time.
And it's about creating memories.
Yeah.
It's the memories that your kids will never forget.
But, you know,
they had this time with you.
Yeah, but, you know, and in retrospect, I'm thinking, oh, we should have had like we should have taken a picture every time, and then I'd make a photo album and all this, and then we didn't.
That's
and then
I'm
like, yeah. And then I'm also like, well, I don't want to make it turn into another thing that we have to worry about and check off the list. Like, we just want to go amble around, and that's what we do. So, yeah, no. And I do. I go to this museum, or like, when I go around New York City, I'm like, oh, I remember going to this, I remember going to that with Eliza. So it's great.
Obviously, you're a driven woman, an accomplished woman, and in reading your books, I thought to myself, okay, so what was your childhood like? Because here you are, a lot of what you do and a lot of what you say in your books is about, you know, creating this childhood for your kids, and making sure that you have those memories and making sure that you're present and there for them. What was it like for you when you were a kid?
You know, I am really lucky. I have like the two greatest parents. I really do. My father is like one of these people who's just very, very happy. And one of the things that really, I feel like I really gained from the book was, I just always thought he was like that. It's like, some people are just like that. And now I'm like, you know what? It takes a lot of work to be that happy and that consistently enthusiastic. And I always really valued it, but now I respect it in a way because I understand that it's a lot of work. You know, I just took it for granted, and now I realize. And my mother too. I have a wonderful mother and a sister that I'm super close to, and we bond over being afraid of driving. And she's also super messy, so I get to go clear her clutter, which is like anytime I'm with somebody who's like embarrassed about their closet, I'm like, oh, you should see my sister. You can do nothing to shock me. So I was very, very fortunate because I had like, and I was a total Hermione kind of person, you know, as you can imagine. You can just imagine what I was like as a child, exactly what you would expect. No, so I was very fortunate that I grew up in Kansas City, which is like it's just like a very lovely kind of middle America place, and so I'm very fortunate in my childhood. Yes.
Do you think that happiness and gratitude go hand in hand?
Huge. Yes, yes, yes. Every study shows that, and everybody knows that in your heart. Like, it's just, there is such a strong connection between a feeling of gratitude and a feeling of happiness. But one of the kind of the dark things of human nature is that it's so easy to take things for granted. And so staying grateful, you know, it's like here you think, oh my gosh, the snow, but then it's like, oh my gosh, but the heat is on and the electricity is going. You know, you take these things for granted and you take people for granted. And so one of the things that comes up over and over again in anybody who's studying happiness is how do you cultivate gratitude and a grateful spirit, especially for things that you can take for granted. So one of the things that I did that I really love is a threshold ritual, because I have an apartment building where I have to open 2 doors to get in, and so there's sort of an automatic stop. I can't just walk in. And so now I use that time to think like how happy I am to be home. And just to have that moment of transition and to always remind me to have that thought, you know, not to take it for granted. And you know, I live in New York City. We were just hit very hard by Sandy. And so many people were saying how there was such a strong feeling of great gratitude for home and a sense of such sympathy for people whose homes were affected, because there is such a feeling of connection. But then, you know, how do you maintain that feeling when there isn't the big event to call it into your mind? So having these kind of rituals are good. And of course, like gratitude before meals is one of the most common things that people do, but you can do it anytime you want. Or a friend of mine has a screensaver that pops up that gives her gratitude messages. So there's all kinds of different ways to do it, but it's very helpful to have some kind of, a friend of mine has like a Tibetan bell that chimes on her phone. I'm like, I would not feel grateful if my phone was just like randomly ringing, but it works for her. So everybody's got a different way.
What's been the biggest surprise since you started this? But maybe something where you thought, okay, so now I get it.
Yeah.
Now I understand what this is all about.
One of the biggest things that consistently surprises me is the degree to which outer order contributes to inner calm for people. It just doesn't seem like it should matter that your coat closet is crowded, or that your fridge is full of leftovers, or that your inbox is overflowing. But over and over, people talk about this connection between outer order and a sense of energy and calm. And it just seems trivial. I completely get that it seems trivial, but it does seem that there is a connection beyond what is logical, and that getting control of stuff makes people feel more in control of their lives. And that has surprised me, why that connection exists to the degree that it does. And another thing that surprised me, and this is when my thinking most dramatically changed from my experience, which was, there's this thing that novelty and challenge bring happiness. This is what all the research shows. And people who do new things are happier, even if like they go to new restaurants, and you know, new experiences make people happy. Learning new things makes people happier. And I thought, well, that's just not true for me. I'm like, I like familiarity and mastery. I do the same thing every day, and like I eat the same food every day. I never leave my neighborhood, except to come to Toronto. But here, I go to the same place. But I had to try, for the purposes of my books, try new things. And first, it's absolutely true. When you do new things, when you learn how to do something new, when you make something better, when you feel that sense of growth, it is a huge engine of happiness. And I just thought that that wouldn't be true for me. And I found out it's absolutely true for me. And now I really look in my life for opportunities to have novelty, to have challenge, to learn to do something new, to push myself a little bit, because it really does make you happy. It feels like it wouldn't, because a lot of times it comes with feelings of feeling stupid or insecure or anxious or frustrated. Like even something like learning how to use a new device in your house. Like, it's so frustrating. And then you have that sense of accomplishment because you're like, I learned to use my shredder or whatever it is. Though I had a toaster that was like, I'm like, it should not be this hard to learn how to use a toaster. I am sorry, this is a design flaw, it's not me. So that was something that really surprised me, is that connection between novelty, challenge, and happiness.
Do you think the lessons that you've learned and the things that you write about in Happier at Home can be translated anywhere, to anyone? Is it transferable, this stuff?
Well, one of the things that interested me about the idea of home is because I was thinking, like, what is universal? Yeah. Because there's very little that's actually really universal. And I was thinking, but the experience of home, the desire for a home, is something that's practically universal. Almost everyone has a home, has an idea of home, and even if it's just like a little tent in in Montana, which I did meet a guy who was like, I have my backpack and that's all I want. And I was like, well, that's good for you, but I need a little bit more than that. And so I hope that just by hearing, seeing the way I thought about it and what I went through, even people who really want very different things from their home or have a very different experience of home would be able to figure out how they would think about it in their own lives. Because clearly there's a lot about me that's other people would have a very different experience, but yet you can think about, maybe this is my gratitude ritual, and you have a completely different setup, but you can figure out how you would do it in your life. Or, you live by yourself, but you still, maybe shrines are even more important to you because you want to make sure that you feel like your home is peopled with the people that you love, since you're by yourself. Or some people really, nature is very important to them. So an idea of how do you bring nature into your home is something that many, many people talk about. For me, it's not that important, but just by hearing what I did, I think sometimes helps people think about, well, that's not true for me, but then what is true for me? And so, and in a way, it's that desire to create that experience that's universal, and then we all need to come to it in our own way.
Do you now have answers to the questions that you sought when you first started writing about happiness?
I think I'm a lot closer. I do feel like I understand things a lot better than I did.
Sounds like you have another book in you, Gretchen.
I do, but
sounds like you have a little something
this book,
happening.
Every book that I write, I'm like, this is going to be the best book in the whole world, and it's going to be the most and my life is going to, as a writer, is going to be downhill from here because nothing is going to be as interesting as this book. And I've thought of that every single time. And my husband will say, you say that every single time. But this book, I do feel like it's going to be so fascinating, and it's about habits. Because I realized, I'd done all this thinking about habits, and then happiness, and then I stepped back and I was like, but really, habits are like this, they're this architecture of life. Like almost like 40% or so of what we do every day is by habit. And I was thinking, so much of happiness is dependent on these habits. And so I really want to look at how do you think about your habits, and how you form your habits, and how you can shape your habits in a way that is going to carry you towards a happier life. Because if you can put those decisions on automatic, then it just happens and you don't have to, fuss about it. But how do you get there? Because habits they're hard to make and hard to break. And a lot of times exactly the opposite of how you want. So I'm really excited about this. I'm really about habits and how they relate to happiness and how do we think about shaping them in our everyday lives.
Have you already started writing?
I have started.
On your laptop?
On my laptop.
On your laptop. There's a lot about her laptop.
Yes, my laptop.
With the laptop.
Yes. It's my comfort object. Yes, my teddy bear. I have it with me. I think I have it with me right now. Yes, I'd never leave home without it.
Is there anything that you don't have that you still want at this point?
I would really like to not dread driving. I can drive.
It
still bugs me. It does, because it's a ubiquitous thing, and I'm like, I would love to love driving, but basically I have everything. I have my. I truly. There's a wonderful line in Mary McCarthy's Manhattan when I was young, and she was saying, like, I had everything in life that it was appropriate to wish for, and I certainly feel that for myself. Like. And one of my central challenges was not to take it for granted and to remember how happy I already am. And so I definitely feel that way.
And that most definitely is the recurring theme. You know, just how happy you are, and you make that point.
Yeah.
I'm happy, but I want to dig a little deeper, right? I want to get a little deeper.
Appreciate it, yeah. And live up to it.
And live up to it. And I love the line where you say, it isn't enough to love, you must prove it.
Yes.
Yeah, that kind of stopped me cold in my shoes as well.
So that's a line from Saint Therese of Lisieux, who's my spiritual master, which is kind of funny because I'm not even Catholic. And I had never heard of Saint Therese, which is, if you know anything about Catholic saints, I mean, she is like Michael Jackson. She's a super saint, and she's actually a doctor of the church, so she is a super saint. She's an elite member of elite category of saints. And she wrote this book, Story of a Soul, which is her spiritual memoir. And Saint Therese is nothing like me, apart from being a great saint. She died at 24 in France, and she'd spent most of her life in a cloistered convent. So she went in, she never left, with like 20 other nuns. But she's this book, Story of a Soul. I mean, I've probably read it 8 times. I've read many, many biographies of Saint Therese. And she has this line, it is not enough to love. We must prove it.
I love that.
Yeah, I know, and it's and the thing that's so fascinating about Saint Therese, I think what drew me to her, and also when she was made a doctor of the church, what was said about her was that how she was able to approach the everyday tasks and everyday challenges with heroic virtue. And so she would talk in her memoir about like how she broke out in a sweat because this nun was making these clicking noises during prayers, and it was just driving her so crazy that she was just like, you know, which is something we can all identify with, you know, this kind of thing. Or like there's this one nun that she just really, really didn't like. She said everything about her annoyed me. And then she made this nun, there's a whole funny story about that nun, but this nun, her special friend, and so she talked about, you know, how do you prove it? How do you show it? What are the things that you would do? And how do you let go of this idea of scorekeeping and how do you put it into action? And it's very helpful to me to think about that line. You were picking up on all my favorite quotations. Okay, we're going to talk. Well, yeah, we're in sync. This is great. Yes, yeah. But anyway, Story of a Soul. It's not for everyone. But if it's the kind of thing that you like, it is an amazing, amazing book, spiritual memoir of Saint Therese.
What is your greatest hope, Gretchen, for your girls, for Eleanor and for Eliza? What is your greatest hope for as far as their happiness is concerned?
Well, I really have come to believe that this idea of being yourself, knowing yourself, is the most important thing for happiness. And so, you know, and it's funny how as a parent, do this, do that, why don't you like this, sure, this is going to be fun, you know, you want them to...
Try to mold them.
You try to mold them. You try to mold them. And I really, and you can imagine what I'm like. And so I really just try to back off, and I really just try to help them understand themselves better, and really try to help them be themselves, and not try to shape them, not try to force them, and yet help them expect more from themselves too. And so I think...
It's a delicate line, though.
Self-knowledge.
It's delicate.
It is a very delicate line. And you do feel like you have a special obligation as a parent because you are shaping so much of their decisions, and you're shaping their life in a way. And you can force them to take piano lessons if you want, which you can't do to your spouse. So you do have this power over them. But on the other hand, you don't. In the end, so I think self-knowledge for myself and for my daughters is what I really hope for them.
What an amazing piece of work it is. Happier at Home. Gretchen Rubin, a follow-up to the Happiness Project, another bestseller. Oh. Congratulations on this, and what a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. This was so much fun.
To spend time with you today. This is fantastic. I think we're going to open it up now.
Excellent.
To the floor and questions. Thanks, everybody. So if you'd like, if you've got a question for Gretchen, please take to the mic. In an orderly way. Gretchen likes it that way.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's right, that's right.
Orderly.
Yeah. Alphabetical.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you think you would come out with either of your books or the next book you're talking about? Would you come out with any of this in DVDs?
In DVDs?
Yeah, like something that you could watch on TV.
Oh, you know, I never thought about that. That's an interesting idea. Maybe that's. I mean, one of the things that, because I have a blog and everything, I'm very interested in how do you give information to people in a way that's helpful to them. So yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I never thought about that, but that would be. I'm always curious about different ways to do that. So yeah.
And I'm so happy I've waited forever. Or it seemed like forever to listen to your lectures. So
well, thank you very much. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you. Thank you.
So nice.
One thing that people, the question I think I most often get is, while people are going to the mic, is how do you insulate yourself from someone else's persistent negativity? This seems to be a big happiness issue. And one thing is, it's hard because you catch that emotion from them. And it seems like the thing that works best is like not to try to cheer them up, but to just acknowledge how they're feeling and not try to influence it too much, because you really rarely do change their point of view about, like, you know, their outlook on the world, and it really will drain you and antagonize them. And so just to acknowledge what they're saying and let them be who they are seems to be the thing that works. Or a sense of humor, but a sense of humor is very advanced, and most people cannot do that. I know that I can't. Yeah.
Hi, Gretchen. How are you? My name is Dean Dwyer. We've communicated a couple times.
Oh, yes. Hello, Dean. Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, we were going to get a cup of coffee.
What's that?
We were going to try to get a cup of coffee.
That's right. Yeah, not realizing that there'd be like 200 people here listening to you. I have no idea what I was thinking when I sent that email. But you were talking. I'm curious in terms of, again, people who follow you. Obviously, you're like a content creation monster. I mean, you've got the YouTube channel or the YouTube video you put out once a week, plus, you know, you're blogging 5 or 6 days a week, and you're writing the books. How do you manage to balance happiness in the context of the stuff that you have to do in terms of your content creation?
Well, part of it is that I love that. I mean, you know, this is what I do on the weekends too, because I love writing, I love thinking, and it's really fun for me. So it's like what I like to do and what I have to do for work turns out to be perfectly in harmony. So that's really good. But one thing I do make sure is, like, do I have enough time just sort of for playtime? My daughter is in 2nd grade and they have something called choice time. I love that. I'm like, I need choice time when I'm just like doing what I choose to do, you know, and feeling a sense of freedom. So I really do think every day, like, am I just reading something for fun? Am I doing something for fun? Not because I feel like I need to, or even though there's things that I really enjoy doing, there is a sense of obligation, and that's different from something that you're just doing for fun. And so I try to make sure that every day I have a little bit of that. But also I love doing all that stuff. So for me, it really is, it's like, that is also what I would do for fun if I weren't doing it for work. So it's easy, it comes naturally. Like, a lot of people say, oh, you have to use so much discipline, but it doesn't take discipline for me because it's really what I enjoy. So I'm lucky.
Thanks.
Hi. So I was in the car listening to the radio once, and the radio, I guess the guy who was talking was going on about how happiness is such a petty goal, and he was saying, like, oh, I have kids, and like nothing about kids like really makes me happy because it's so stressful, which I thought was kind of interesting to admit on the radio. But then I was thinking about some things that you've written. So for example, like having children is really fog happiness.
Yeah,
like if you look at the specific things, you're like, I hate disciplining them, but they give you fog happiness. You've said that happiness is like, you know it when you see it, or you know it when you feel it. Yeah. Or like your quote, happiness doesn't always make you feel happy. So I was wondering, like, I'm sure you don't define happiness in like it always makes me feel happy type of way. I was wondering how you would define happiness.
Well, I carefully evade that question because, you know, I spent a year, I was a lawyer, and so I spent a semester in law school arguing about the definition of a contract. And And happiness is very hard to define. And so I really focus more on this idea of like, what would make me happier? Like, so is this something that's gonna make me happier? Is that gonna make me happier? And that seems like a clearer thing to understand. Like, am I gonna be happier if I go to bed earlier? Am I gonna be happier if I join a book group? Am I gonna be happier if I stop nagging? And that's usually clear, whereas like, am I happy is like a very, this like makes me crazy. And like, what is happiness? It's like peace, joy, bliss, satisfaction, contentment. It can get very, very complicated. So I think it's more about moving in the right direction than some kind of definitive state or crossing some finish line. It is interesting where there's been a lot of talk just recently about this idea that happiness is less worthy than other goals of life. But the problem is like, well, the kind of things that those people say, like somebody said to me, well, I don't worry about happiness. I worry about a life dedicated to others and enjoying the moment and getting a little bit of exercise every day. And I was like, well, if you were trying to be happy, that's exactly what you would be doing too. And so I think sometimes it's a little bit of a semantic game, which is why I don't like to get into the definition, because people then just swap it out for you. And they're like, you're talking about a life of fulfillment, or you're like, you know, and I'm like, well, a life of fulfillment, a life of happiness, you know. Whatever. And that's why happier is something that it's more about moving than about the state, and that somehow just seems easier for the layperson. Obviously, scientists have to have very specific definitions, or philosophers, but us lay people can just use the loose term happiness, which kind of can embrace a lot of different ideas.
Thank you. I just wanted to say one more thing. My absolute favorite quote that you've written is, I think you said, without Jamie and the girls, I would just wander through the apartment reading, writing, and eating cereal together. And I read that, and I like made everyone I know read it.
Oh, really?
I was like, this is me.
Oh, that's so funny.
My partner will call home on the weekend when I'm alone, and I'll be like, I don't know what I did, and I ate cereal for dinner. So I actually wrote it on the whiteboard.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah. Oh, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's so funny.
Hello. So I have a question for you today about conflicting happiness habits in your home.
Oh, yeah.
So one of my happiness habits is, because I'm pretty overdramatic, I'm trying to not sweat the small stuff. Whereas my partner probably subscribes to the get the outside clutter away. Mm-hmm. So during the week, I could care less if I'm picking up after myself. I'm just trying to not sweat the small stuff.
Right.
Whereas he can't take it. Right. He just wants it clean. Yeah. So what is your advice for if your partner and you have conflicting happiness requirements?
This is an issue. I mean, and the most sort of extreme version I've heard of this is somebody was like, I feel that for my happiness, I need to go on a 10-day silent meditation retreat, but my husband doesn't want to be alone with our 3 kids for that long. And I'm like, I can see both points of view. So sometimes there is a conflict. You know, again, there's one of my personal commandments is to identify the problem, which sounds so obvious, but maybe if you just really sit down and said, like, what are the real things that are bothering you, and really try to say, like, if I put my dishes in the sink, if I hang up my coat, is that going to be enough for you? You know, because maybe there's sometimes we can choose to do things out of love, even though we don't think that they're important, because they're important to someone else. And this is this clutter, like, what is the level of clutter is something that is a big conflict among couples. Like, and it's not easy because people just are comfortable in different situations. And the problem is you don't need it, and your partner really does. And so, but a lot of times you can kind of arrive at a place where maybe you can sweat a few of the things that seem small to you in order for him to feel comfortable in the environment. Because, and this is one of the things, like, it's so obvious, but it took me so long to understand it. But once I understood it, I realized it's so, so important and true. Just because something is important to you doesn't mean that it's important to someone else. And people don't tend to spend much time on things that they don't think are important, at least without a lot of nagging. And the thing is, it's just not important to you, but it's important to him. And that's just a conflict. So, I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer there, except to say that a lot of people have exactly that problem. So maybe, you know, try to find a middle ground and to stay on top of it. Like sometimes doing little bits every day is easier than big cleanups, and so it might feel so small to you that you can do it if you just do it, like just a few tasks every day, but it's hard. Yeah.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, I've started my own modest happiness project.
Excellent.
And I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase, you know, in progress, there's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And so I was wondering what your progress was like and how you dealt with the failures, because there's obviously going to be some as you continue to try and be more happy or happier.
Well, one of the things that I remind myself is to enjoy the fun of failure, because there is always failure, and if you're a certain kind of person, it's like you don't want to fail, and so it's very upsetting, and then you always want to get the A+, and but I realized that for me, like, if I wasn't willing to fail, then there was a lot of things that I wasn't going to try. And so I was really, again, choosing the bigger life. There was a lot of things I wasn't going to do. And I wrote about this on my blog, and somebody wrote, they were like, oh, don't frame it as failure. It's this, it's that, and you can think about it in this other way. And I thought, well, that's right. And then I thought, no, that's totally wrong. Like, I don't want to be, like, I don't have to pretend like I didn't fail. That's part of the problem. It's like I have to, like, embrace it and admit it and move on. It's not a terrible thing. Enjoy the fun of failure. So part of it is really trying to see that as part of the process. And then also, you know, a lot of the things that I do in my happiness project, and I don't know if this is true for yours, it's like every day is a new chance. Like you blow it today, but you can try again tomorrow. And like some days are good and some days are bad. And some days, like perfectly consciously, I will just violate every rule that I know is true, you know, but tomorrow is another day. So part of it is just like, it's just happier, just moving in the right direction.
And if you do violate all your rules,
yeah.
What do you do with the guilt of violating rules?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I try to cut myself some slack, go to bed earlier, and try again the next day. Yeah, no, it's just like it's sometimes we just don't do it. You know, why do we do the things that we know are gonna make us unhappy? I don't know. This is a big question for habits. Like, why don't you do the things that you know are going to make you better and feel happier, and yet you don't do them? You know, so part of it is just getting your mind around it and thinking it through.
Thank you.
I'm sure your daughters are pretty aware of the topics that you're working on and the things that you're occupying your thoughts with. I'm wondering if you have done. I mean, I'm sure you're often kind of in a balance of trying to, you know, you want them to be happy,
yeah.
but you don't want to push them
yeah.
in a particular direction. Have you done anything to try to encourage them to do something like your happiness project? I mean, obviously on a smaller scale, but in a way that's appropriate for them?
You know, not really. And part of it is because I think there's an unself-consciousness to children that's that I wouldn't want to disturb, and part of it is just, you know, I don't want to turn it into an occasion of nagging. You know, are you doing this? Are you doing that? So it's more like I try to create an atmosphere where it's natural to do the things that I think would foster a person's happiness, but I don't really directly shape it. I'm in an interesting situation now because my older daughter is 13, and so she is coming into an awareness of what I've written and stuff in a way that she wasn't before, you know, because she's just, and so that's sort of interesting. I feel kind of exposed in a new way, not in a bad way, but in a new way. And so it's interesting sometimes when I'll hear her, I can kind of tell that something that I've written or talked about, she's sort of processing. But I don't really do that much. And sometimes I thought, should I be doing more to try to kind of consciously shape what they're doing or make them consciously shape what they're doing. But so far, I really haven't. I'm very focused on the self, myself, and I always think of things about happiness related to the person themselves, because that's really the only person that we can change is ourself. And so I don't think about it too much in terms of what would I ask someone else to do. But from time to time, I think maybe I should think about that more explicitly, especially with children.